Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Futurum Group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Let's meet today's panelists before we jump into the topic for the episode, starting with Fernando.
Hello, everyone. Fernando Montenegro. I lead cybersecurity and resilience research over here at Futurum, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Good.
And we're glad to have you. And joining us this week as co-host is Mr. Jack Poller.
Hello, everyone. I am the principal analyst and founder of Paradigm Technica, an analyst firm focusing on cybersecurity.
All right. And of course, I'm Tom Hollingsworth. I'm the event lead for Security Field Day, as well as many other security topics at Tech Field Day. Let's jump into today's episode, and we're going to be talking about hacking, which is a topic that we brought up before, but the last week, as of this recording, has seen some very interesting developments, specifically around nation-state actors and their targets. If you're not keeping up with the news, Stryker, which is a large healthcare organization, had to release information that they had been hacked, and not just hacked as in we took some of their data, but they had most of their systems wiped, including their employees' laptops, phones, and pretty much anything that had lights on it. And in this case, we're not talking about our good friend Ted Stryker or even William Stryker. We're talking about the people who led a strike against Stryker and what that could potentially mean for the future of warfare as it is encompassing cybersecurity more and more. So I'm going to kind of open this up to my co-hosts here. I don't necessarily know that I was shocked that Stryker got hacked. I think it was more amusing to see how thoroughly they had been dumped, because you would hope that healthcare and hospitals had better security, but apparently at least the people who got in touch with them definitely got in touch with them.
So let me start by saying a couple of things. First of all, I have a good friend. She's an amazing threat intelligence analyst. She goes by Stryker on social media. So when I saw the news that Stryker was hacked, I was like, oh my God, let me reach out to her. No, it's fine, right? The other thing is that I'm old school, and I'm still one of those hacking is not a crime people, right? So I don't like the term. They weren't hacked; they were attacked, right? But your point stands, right? In the context that they were attacked. And listen, we are in the middle of perilous time with geopolitical implications, and we've seen it time and time again that this affiliation, that there are state-affiliated groups that will do things for non-financial reasons, right? And in this day and age where a significant portion of the conversation around defenses and threat modeling focuses on the financial motivation of attackers, which, yes, they are there. This is a harsh reminder that there are non-financial motivations. And we've had it here. I have more to say, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Well, I don't disagree with you completely, but I would take issue with a couple of points, and I think we need to make a differentiation between hacking, which, as you say, is, there's sort of ethical hacking and maybe non-ethical hacking, but I think this was much more an attack. And I think the cybersecurity industry has been talking for not years, but decades about nation state attackers, right? And I think the difference here, as you mentioned, is up until now, and maybe not even up until now, but almost always the nation state attackers are financially motivated. We have seen hacktivist groups that are doing things for politically motivated or social justice reasons, but for the most part, vast majority are financially motivated in one form or another. And in this case, the only financial motivation here was the total destruction of another company, who was perceived to be, apparently a U.S. company and could damage U.S. from somebody who is non-U.S. and doesn't like the U.S. But I think what's really striking about this isn't the fact that they were attacked, but was that they were destroyed instead of had their data exfiltrated in ransomware or other typical attack vectors.
Yeah, I I I agree. Where I'm poking on things a little bit is that, yes, we've seen this type of motivated attacker before, and, again, I'm not directly involved in the IR for this or anything, so I'm speaking with second level, third level information. But the what appears to have happened here is that there's good and there's bad, right? The bad, of course, is that they were attacked and suffered significant disruption. The good is that, from what I understand, the company did something really good in that some of the medical device networks are segregated, right? And those medical devices were not affected by this, right? In this day and age of like flat networks and SDN everything, it's like it's a good reminder that yeah, some good old fashioned segregation is warranted, and particularly if you're dealing with this type of mission critical, life critical type of environments. And I salute those who work in healthcare IT, because they have to deal with that with what is it, chewing gum and baling wire, right? Sometimes, right? But yeah, so in this case, yes, it was bad, but you know what? Kudos to the team who segregated their networks and avoided a larger impact.
So I'll just throw this out there because I think it's kind of interesting. I think one of the reasons why hospital healthcare IT has been maybe less at the front, maybe less rigorous, is because there's this kind of understood goal that in a war you don't attack hospitals. You also don't attack churches and schools and places of refuge and things like that. But one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of those mores, if you want to call that, for these things are kind of being put by the wayside. And I noticed it a couple years ago when we started seeing reports that the criminal attackers, people doing it for money, were going after hospitals. And at the time, it was because, oh well, hospitals will pay because they don't want to lose lives, and it's a huge hit to their reputation if their entire healthcare system goes down, and that means that they're willing to pay up. But now what we're seeing is people who are not motivated by money but are motivated by ideology or orders are going after them because they make really good soft targets. And they're not the only thing, too. Power infrastructure is one thing that we keep talking about. And the reason why this is relevant to me is because I was thinking back, oh man, over 10 years ago, I wrote an article for a ambassador forum where I talked about the fact that what's going to happen when some of these kind of off limits targets are no longer off limits, and how does that impact that? Because we know that certain systems are definitely hardened against intrusion because they are common attack vectors. I think that the CIA servers are probably some of the best on the planet, not just because they keep all the secrets, but because it's the first thing that everybody wants to hack. But a hospital in, either in a mid-sized U.S. state or possibly even a rural hospital system make very tempting targets when you know that you can basically kind of waltz in and do whatever you want, because they're not focused on keeping attackers out. They're focused on billing and keeping patient records secure. But I mean, it's the minimum necessary to make that happen with the budgets that they have, which, as you guys brought up, are often very infinitesimal compared to the cost of an aspirin at that same hospital.
Well, I think one of the things you brought up is you mentioned hospitals, you mentioned healthcare, and you mentioned power stations, right? And what occurs to me is that we've talked a lot in the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years about critical infrastructure and cybersecurity needing to protect critical infrastructure. And we had the pipeline incident on the East Coast. I can't remember what the name of the pipeline was
Colonial
that was
pipeline.
taken. The Colonial Pipeline that was taken down, right? But more and more as interconnected an environment and an interconnected society we have, particularly here in the United States, we're highly dependent on digital communications in the digital world to do business. And more things that we wouldn't think of as critical infrastructure are critical infrastructure. So yeah, obviously your power supplies are, your energy supply, your healthcare is, but then go down the line and what do those suppliers depend on? And you don't think that, oh, well, an ambulance is dependent on Stryker's medical network for the information it transmits on the way. Or, well, how many of those ambulances are routed by Google, right? By Waze or by another mapping application, and what happens if that disappears? Right? There's a lot of things that secondary and third in what we would think about traditionally as the software supply chain, but it's actually the services supply chain that are also critical infrastructure that we don't think about it as that, and that could be very well compromised or attacked by these people who, again, aren't financially motivated, but want to just wreak destruction and havoc across the world.
And yes, and every yes and right the name of yes and but and one of the things that this calls out, it's something that we've talked about in the show before, and it continues to be true. Like we talk about it because it is that it's now that much more important, that much more strategic. Mark Andreessen said in 2011, software is going to eat the world. Yes, software eats the world. Here we are having an indigestion, right? So what ends up happening is that the complexity of that network, exactly as you described, right? If you ask a bare bones security executive about their environment, they may not understand that, oh, look, the ambulances that are being routed uh, need guidance and need that kind of access and so on. I was just one of the things I'm looking into is how does the profession evolve, right? And one of the things that I keep coming back to is because this is all more important, we get more and more specialized in some ways, right? I think that one of the most important roles that are coming up in industry, as particularly for larger companies, right, is not so much the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, it's the BISO, right, the Business Unit
Mhm.
Information Security Officer, because that person, they are they have the mandate of having one hand in or one leg in the cybersecurity realm to understand technology, to understand threats, to understand controls, but another view on what does that business unit need, right? So as we talk to practitioners and sometimes I talk to early career professionals or people wanting to get into the industry, one of the areas that's interesting is okay, look, cybersecurity is way too big to be a cyber expert for everything. You can't, right? How do you specialize? And those types of ISO type of roles are or and the structure that they need are really interesting in all of this.
One of the other parts of that I'm glad you brought that up is in cybersecurity, as you think about that specialization, we are very much focused downward and inward as a cybersecurity person, right? As how do I look at my role and what I'm doing as protecting this service, right? And we talk about protection all the time. We talk about risk reduction all the time. We have security controls. It's all focused on the world of IT, which is, in my view, necessary, but it's insufficient. We really need to think upwards as well, which is we're providing a service to the business. And part of the service that cybersecurity is providing is business uptime and continuity, right? And reliability, right? So IT thinks about it as if my systems go down because we had a misconfiguration or because the server crashed, the business fails, right? And we need to maintain uptime for the business, right? Cybersecurity needs to think somewhat in the same terms as that I'm protecting these services and these IT environments, not just to protect them, but the end goal, the ultimate goal is keeping the business up and running. And I bring that up because we look at Stryker, and now we don't know all the details. In fact, we have very little details, but we do know that they had a lot of things go wrong simultaneously. And my heart goes out to the CISO and to the security team and the IT team that has probably spent a week plus and is now going to spend another month or two on very sleepless nights, right, trying to put all of this back together. but what plans did people put in place for the catastrophic events that could happen? Did they do any wargaming? Did they do any planning and thinking about not just what happens if somebody attacks my web server and therefore I need a web firewall, but what happens if they destroy my infrastructure in some form or another, right? I think Tom and I have talked about this before about Active Directory is a critical component in a lot of environments. If your Active Directory goes down, everything goes down, right? You can't get anywhere if you can't authenticate. How do you bring up your environment? How do you bootstrap and get started? Has people thought about these things and think about what does the business need to get running again?
And again, phenomenal questions. Where one of the ironies of this is my understanding of the Stryker incident so far is that that destruction that you're talking about was achieved via traditional management tools, right? It's that the way that you wipe laptops is with your MDM tool of choice. And again, that's how we use MDM tools, right? Oh, look, we want to wipe a device. Great. You wipe a device. Oh, we want to wipe all of the devices. And to some extent, that how do you navigate the impact of something like this? Um, it's governance, right? As much as I love to talk about the impact of AI and agents and everything, which is again 2026, right? This kind of more traditional security controls are still fundamentally important, right? If was this an issue of hey, we didn't have proper authentication on a on our MDMs? Is this an issue of the authorizations weren't set up right, and somebody had the ability to do whatever they wanted? So we need to work through those things and let that be a lesson for every other organization out there. One of the things that I've had, there's quite a few people in industry who brought it up before. It's we need to understand the misses and the near misses, right? I mean, aviation does this extremely well, right? We need to continue doing that in cyber. Like, I'm hoping that everyone who's reviewing the Stryker incident is looking at, okay, so how is our infrastructure resilient against this? What would we need to change about? And then they improve that a little bit. Right?
Right. I think, yeah, there's the, I think about that really as sort of fundamental cybersecurity hygiene. And despite all of, the cybersecurity community is very like all techies, right? We get excited by the cool shiny new toy. Right now, the cool shiny new toy is AI. Everything is AI, and we're going to hear all about AI in the RSA conference. We're going to hear all about AI for the next couple of years. But if organizations don't do basic cybersecurity hygiene, if they don't do authentication and authorization correctly, if they don't do vulnerability scanning, which is very, very boring, but very critical to your environment. If you don't understand what's going on in your environment, if you don't have good inventory of what's there, you can't protect what you don't know about. And it's so much of what I see when I talk to CISOs is that's the part they struggle with is just getting the basics done. And a lot of times, I talk to, as an analyst, I talk to a lot of companies and a lot of CISOs and security professionals, and they say, a lot of the CISOs say, all these startups come to me and they tell me I have a problem, right? Like, yeah, I get I have a problem, and I'd love to buy your toy, but I got a different problem, right? I still can't convince my company to make MFA mandatory for the entire company, right?
And
Because it's too much friction, right? But we know what a bit, right? So it's if we can't get these basics done, how do we get the rest of it done?
and this is where I praise the amazing concept that like Wendy Nater came across came up with many years ago. I think she was back at 451. The notion of the cybersecurity poverty line, right?
Yes.
We need to understand that there is a level, right, and I think we've been tiptoeing around this point. I mean, many healthcare institutions, uh, they they may struggle with meeting cybersecurity minimums. So how do we help address that problem? Well, one of the things we can do is how can we make that? How can we lower that cybersecurity? There's two ways to do this, right? Either you lower the cybersecurity minimum, or you raise the capabilities, or you raise the resources that somebody has to meet that minimum, right? And this is one of the areas where I'm a huge fan of the work that CISA and others are doing in helping to, in a way, they are working towards doing kind of both, right? On one hand, they are helping people uh, get better cybersecurity insights cheaper, right? Either it's freely available, like it's like the known exploited vulnerability, the CAV lists, right, or the guidance from CISA, right? All of that is free information, hoping to lower the cost of implementing better controls, right? At the same time that they are pushing vendors with secure by default to reduce the number of things that may happen. But anyway, it's it's a public policy. It's a complex public policy problem that we're not going to solve in a podcast episode. We're not going to solve in a year or 2 or 5 or 10. It's the maturity of this industry, and incidents like the Stryker one is one more notch on, okay, perhaps we need to fix one more thing here.
But I think that the striker problem is something that executives need to pay attention to because it changes the equation of their risk management. To borrow that line from Fight Club, if A plus B plus C is less than the cost of a recall, we don't do one. Well, in this case, all of those executives were looking at, what is the cost for an outage? What is the likelihood that all systems would be affected? And what is the likelihood that we will get attacked? And they were doing the math to figure out, is the cyber insurance going to pay and all those other things we do. And that was working off of a flawed assumption. And the flawed assumption was the people attacking us wanted to get paid, and that they were going to do the minimum amount of damage and work necessary to make that happen so that they could get paid and move on to a different target. So the same way that you calculate whether or not a venture capital investment or a private equity investment is going to wreck your company, what's the minimum amount of money that I have to make them to get them out of my organization? But now you're dealing with another group of people who don't care. Their method is to wipe everything. So now your cost for an outage goes up significantly. And you can't pay them off. You can't, send them money and hope that they go away. They're not leaving until they've salted the earth. And that's the problem when you're dealing with a group of people that are not motivated by money. They are going to do what they came to do, and you can't stop them. It's very similar to what we dealt with years ago with Fancy Bear and SolarWinds. They weren't motivated by money. They were motivated by things like intelligence gathering and other non-monetary solutions. And so that's why they were able to sneak in and get very creative in the way that they dropped things. And it took us a long time to root those out. This is the exact opposite. They're not trying to sneak in quietly. They're trying to make noise. I mean, we saw that with the defacements that happened where, they wanted you to know who hacked them. And if you think this is an isolated incident, not 2 days later, a robotic surgery company was hacked and had a lot of their systems knocked offline. And I have it on pretty good authority that surgeries were canceled that used those robots because they couldn't verify that the robots wouldn't get knocked offline in the middle of a surgery. You've created an environment where people don't trust the healthcare system. Could you imagine if modern healthcare tried to go back to using paper and pen? Like I was telling somebody this, I think it was Jack, I was telling this on a story the other day. I remember, because I used to work for Walmart when I was in high school. I remember one day in the late 90s when the cash register system went down and we had to go back to using carbons on credit cards.
Yeah.
And how much of a nightmare that was. And do you know now you can't actually do that anymore?
That's right.
Because most credit cards can't run through a carbon machine because they don't have raised digits on the card face anymore. They're all smooth because we've moved away from that technology. Could you imagine trying to do something? I mean, no knock on doctors and nurses and PAs and medical professionals because they're going to do everything they can. But just think about the last time you were in a hospital, the way that they dosed medication. Like they have to scan into a chart, they have to scan the bottle, they have to do all these things as a way to double check to make sure that they're not going to be giving you the wrong medication or giving you the wrong dose or anything like that. Like that's difficult to overcome on the best of days when it was an accident or when it was a crime. Now, when it's a military assault or something that looks very similar to it, that's going to cause a lot of problems in the healthcare system. That's just going to exacerbate the problem. But then again, that's the point. The point is to make it hurt for people. Now, imagine if they hacked a hydroelectric dam. Imagine if they hacked the Texas power grid again, only this time they're not attacking it when it's 9 degrees outside, they're attacking it when it's 99 degrees outside and shutting off all the air conditioners across the state of Texas. I don't want to live in Houston without an air conditioner.
So you bring up two things that I want to talk about. One is real quickly, we actually had that more recently than your credit card issue. We had it last year, the year before, where I think it was last year, where one of the major service providers that handled auto purchases
Yeah.
was right.
Hmm.
They got ransomware attacked, and for a week or two, the all the car dealers had to go back to filling out contracts by hand, and that really put a crimp in their business. But more importantly, I think one of the other things that between you and Fernando brought up that, one of the ways that you wipe all of a company's systems is by using their management tools, right? And what you were talking about, this being a military attack, this reflects to me the immaturity of the cybersecurity industry. Despite being 40 or 50 years old now, we still haven't put in place some of the manual governance solutions we do have in the military or in the finance system, where you have dual controls for a lot of things. You can't launch a nuclear weapon without having two people, right, approve it simultaneously. Same thing with finances. There's a lot of places in finances where you can't write a check over a certain amount of money without getting multiple signatures involved to make sure that, it's not a hack, or it's not, people collude, it's not you trying to embezzle from the company. And, there's a difference between, from a company perspective, there's a difference between wiping a single device and destroying all devices with a single command. And something like that maybe should be protected by dual controls or
I
other approval
agree. And
methods.
but the purpose of a dual control is friction, but we are all about eliminating friction. And I hate to break it to you, Jack, but War Games was 50 years ago. You can launch
God.
nuclear weapons with one person today.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Now, but here's the thing: like we as cybersecurity people, we are only thinking about one side of the ledger, right? We're only thinking about, here we are talking about adding the controls, adding the dual control. What if, and Tom brought it up, what if the risk calculation here, right? If I need if the dual control is excessive, right? 999,999 times out of a million that we use it, right? But at one time, it absolutely made sense. Does the risk, does the cost, is there the cost trade-off to doing this, right? And I go back to one of the most, it was a simple post, but it was one of the most impactful posts I read. Daniel Miessler, right? He does a lot of AI stuff now, but he wrote years ago about why software is insecure. And it came off to a very simple conclusion. Software is insecure because the cost of insecure software is something that we are willing to accept. Period. The moment that the cost of insecure software becomes too much, we will address it. And here we are addressing it, right? So the cost, the challenge here is that because we are now using technology all over the place, right? The opportunities for that cost blow up is that much higher, and that is an evolving conversation with cybersecurity executives, with line of business executives, with senior company management, with regulators and users about, okay, here's what we need to, here's the environment we're dealing with, right? And I go back to it. There's good and there's bad from the Stryker incident, right? Tom's absolutely right. It's horrible that we are now in an environment like this. Was a reminder that you can be hit with things that are not financial related. But honestly, I think it was good that, look, they segregated their net. I go back to the network segregation, right? We are learning some lessons. Are we learning the lessons fast enough? Probably not.
Well,
That,
that's
that, that's the thing
I'm
with happening.
snorting because
Yeah.
we had this lesson that we could have learned 2 years ago when the Las Vegas casinos got hit. And yeah, it was financially motivated, but it still took down a business that is literally time and money, and that's all they do is they trade time for money at all, right? And took them down for a very long time at millions and millions and millions of dollars of cost, and the entire cybersecurity community and the entire business community went, oh well.
I don't know if they did, right? I mean, speaking with security executives after the casino breaches, like there were plenty of conversations around afterwards. And this is the thing, like I'm minor soapbox issue for me. Uh, this is all uh, this is like the Stryker incident, the robotic surgery incident, the casinos, the Colonial Pipeline. These are all horrible incidents. I agree, right? But are we not overcompensating? You know the story about Abraham Wald and the bullet plane, the bullet holes on planes from World War II,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Are we not talking about survivorship bias here, right? Are we not, or availability bias for the incident, right? Are things decidedly getting worse? Are we not learning these lessons? I am not sure. I'm optimistic in the sense that think about all the with all the technology that we have available, with all the attack surface that we have available, are things getting worse? I don't know. I can see arguments for and I can see arguments against.
Well, I go back to and maybe it's my soapbox because I spent a lot of time in identity, in identity security, right? But the casino attacks were in part predicated by user impersonation of IT people to
Mhm.
reset passwords, right? Now, what did we hear about late last year, 2 years later, was the overwhelming number of companies that have hired North Korean workers who are impersonating other people, right? So we're still not being very good on validating human authentication and understanding that part of the equation, which is where critical infrastructure inside a company, your IT support staff is your critical infrastructure inside the human's critical infrastructure. That's kind of critical, right? If and again, we don't know the details of the Stryker attack, but rumor has it that it was related to their MDM environment and that somebody got a hold of management credentials and super user credentials. And if that's the case, then we're still back to basic authentication authorization problems, and that's again, this is my soapbox, and I'll go back to what I said earlier about sort of the shiny thing. A lot of organizations, a lot of CISOs, and a lot of ink is spilled over zero-day vulnerabilities and right, and those types of attacks. But and I wrote an article about this on Security Boulevard because we've had 2 decades of rise in DBIR data that shows that the majority of attacks start with a human and a credential attack. And Google came out with a cloud threat report this quarter that said the exact same thing. 83% of the cloud attacks they saw came from an identity attack, right? So why are we focused on vulnerability? So it's necessary to focus on vulnerability, but if you don't understand the human side of the equation, then we're
I
still
am
kind of screwed.
I am in wholehearted agreement with you on the focus on identity and more, right? I think that
Right.
it's uncanny, right? Vulnerabilities play a part, but it's much more about how are these systems used, and these are used by humans and eventually by agents. But my optimistic pushback maybe is what is a good number, right? Yes, we had strike. Like what
Yes.
proportion of companies that could have been affected by North Korean fake workers was actually affected, and what is an acceptable number. We still have car accidents, but that doesn't mean the roads are not safer, right? Can they be made better?
True.
Yes. We still have airplane accidents, right? But things are getting better. So my question is, at which point, like from a risk management perspective, we have to up our game to understand this risk trade-off and to guide, because if we go to guide senior executives, right? Because if we go to a senior executive and say failure is not an option, like Apollo 13, right? Fine, works wonderful as a line in a movie, works wonderful for, look, this mission, this NASA mission, but does it work in the real world? And if we as cybersecurity professionals don't acknowledge this imperfections in the real world, we get laughed out of the room, right? Because we don't because our advice doesn't get implemented because it's not realistic. So I'm all for, I'm 100% with you on identity being a key thing. I just want to make sure that we have the right expectations. It's like my golf game, right? Listen, if I get 100 yards short to within 15 feet, that is PGA level, right? The fact that I didn't hit it in the hole shouldn't be like. So it's what are the expectations that people have and should have about cybersecurity? That's my soapbox.
So I want to give you guys a chance to kind of give everyone out there a lessons learned from this. And I'll tell you why, because you bring up a really good point that after the MGM hack, that people learned a lot in the casino industry. And after this hack, people are going to learn a lot in the healthcare industry. And it's very segregated in that way. We don't see a lot of the lessons carrying across between different organizations because out there somewhere is somebody who's justifying this as, oh, that can never happen to me. So I'm going to ask both of you, what is one thing that in general IT security people need to have taken away from the Stryker incident that they can implement in their own organization to prevent something of this scale from happening in the future?
I would say it's not a question of if, it's only a question of when, and therefore focus on how you're going to maintain your business continuity, right? Whatever you need to do to get up and running if a catastrophe happens. That's the lesson.
That's a very good one. Very, very good. I would add that the major lesson here is um, understand how the threat model changes and what it means for your organization. Right? If you're operating under the assumption that that your only adversary is script kiddies, like we used to call them, right? Or financial actors, maybe that's not the case. And what does that mean for your environment? And if I can throw in one more there, is that the absolute, utter, complete importance of identity, right? So on cybersecurity is not a is not purely a technical discipline, right? It is a socioeconomical, political, technical discipline, and the way that users interact with this cybersecurity environment is through identity. So nail down, like, if you can get your identity management, that's perfect.
All right, we are going to wrap this episode up. I want to give our hosts a chance to tell you some of the stuff that they're working on, starting with our guest this week, Jack. Jack, if people want to check out some of the stuff you've been working on, where can they go to learn more?
You can learn more at paradigmtechnica.com or LinkedIn and Security Boulevard.
And we appreciate all the posts that you've been putting up on securityboulevard.com. Fernando, what about you?
I'm futurumgroup.com is where we post most of our stuff. We're working on several reports together. Um, uh, when we're recording this, it's the week before the RSA conference, so you're going to find me running around the expo halls. But outside of that, yes, futurumgroup.com, LinkedIn is my favorite, and here, like, and I love to interact with people, so do reach out, and we can chat.
We want to thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Security Boulevard podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application so you don't miss any episodes. We also would love it if you'd leave us a rating and a review because that does help the show grow. This podcast is brought to you by securityboulevard.com and the Futurum Group. For more show notes and episodes, check out securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard website and TechStrong TV website, or check out the TechStrong TV app, which is available on Apple TV, Roku, and pretty much every smart device out there. We also want you to follow us on socials, X, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just look for Security BLVD for lots more content. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.